The jury's gonna believe me, though.
It's not what you know, Clyde. It's what you can prove in court. Listen, I know you don't think it right now, but this is a victory for us.
The story begins one quiet night in a suburban area just outside Philadelphia. Inside his home, a man named Clyde Alexander Shelton is busy working with some electronic equipment. His young daughter is nearby, happily making a bracelet for her dad. The peaceful evening is suddenly shattered by a knock at the front door. Shelton's wife calls out from the kitchen, asking him to answer it. The moment Shelton opens the door, two burglars, a man named Clarence Darby and his partner Rupert Ames, force their way inside. Darby violently attacks Shelton, beats him down, and ties him up. He then stabs Shelton in the stomach with a knife. Looking down at him, Darby coldly says, "You can't fight fate." Hearing the commotion, Shelton's wife comes out of the kitchen, and Darby immediately attacks her too. He stabs her, and then horrifically sexually assaults her, forcing Shelton to watch it all happen. Ames tries to stop his partner, insisting they were only there to steal things, but Darby ignores him and continues his brutal attack. In the worst possible moment, Shelton's little daughter walks into the room, confused and scared. Darby notices her and starts moving toward the child. Shelton tries desperately to scream for help, but his mouth is covered with duct tape. All he can do is lie there, bleeding and completely helpless, forced to witness the terrible abuse and murder of his wife and little girl. Several months go by, and we are now in the city of Philadelphia. A top prosecutor named Nick Rice is walking with his boss, Jonas Cantrell, heading to their office. Nick is very proud of his record, winning more than 9 out of every 10 cases he handles, and he is always looking to improve that number. Jonas stops their other conversation to ask Nick about the case involving the murder of Clyde Shelton's wife and daughter. He warns Nick to be careful and think things through, but Nick feels that getting a sure win in court is the same as getting justice. His way of thinking is simple. The legal system is not perfect and can be broken, but his only job inside that system is to get results he can be sure of. It turns out Nick has already arranged a deal with Darby. He meets with Clyde Shelton, who has healed physically from his stab wound, but is still deeply broken inside. Nick explains the agreement. In return for admitting to a lesser crime of third-degree murder and testifying that the sexual assault and the whole plan were Ames is doing, Darby will only serve about 5 years in prison. On the other hand, Ames will almost certainly get the death penalty. Shelton hates this idea completely. He saw everything with his own eyes and knows that Darby was the real monster, the one in charge, while Ames was just a follower who tried to stop it. Shelton begs Nick to take the case to trial. But Nick tells him it's not that simple. He says the physical evidence is not reliable, and a judge has already decided it's weak. Even with Shelton's own memories and the DNA, Nick fears a trial could go very wrong. The evidence might get thrown out, and Shelton's testimony could be questioned because he passed out from his injury during the attack. If that happens, both men could go completely free. Nick insists this deal is the only way to guarantee that at least one of them is punished. The day arrives for Darby to stand before a judge and accept his deal. Even though he is making the deal happen, Nick feels deep disgust for Darby because of the terrible crimes he committed. After the court session, Shelton watches from a distance outside the courthouse. He sees Nick shake Darby's hand for the news cameras. At that moment, Shelton looks completely destroyed and walks away, his faith in everything shattered. Back at home, Nick and his wife are expecting a baby daughter of their own. This is probably why he finds Darby so repulsive and feels bad about the deal he just made. But he pushes those feelings aside and tells himself that this is just how the system works. A full 10 years have passed. The Rice family is now full of life, with their daughter growing up into a talented young girl. She has a big cello recital coming up, but Nick can't be there to watch her play. He has to go to the state prison to witness the scheduled execution of Rupert Ames. He is joined by Sarah Lowell, a new and promising young prosecutor. This is Sarah's first time seeing an execution. When the guards ask Ames if he has any last words, he insists he wasn't the one who committed the worst parts of the crime and claims the state is killing the wrong person. Then, the execution begins, and the chemicals start flowing into his veins. What should be a calm and peaceful death turns into a terrifying scene of horror. Ames's body begins to convulse and shake violently as he is clearly in unbearable pain. Everyone watching is helpless and completely shocked. Nick quickly tells Sarah to leave the room. Something has clearly gone very, very wrong with the procedure. An investigation is launched immediately. A prison inspector discovers that the labels on the bottles of execution drugs have been tampered with. The deadly chemicals were swapped out and altered. The usual sedatives were replaced with a powerful neurotoxin, a poison that freezes the body but leaves the person fully awake and aware of every second of pain they are feeling. While Nick is looking closely at one of the small bottles, he notices a message scratched into its surface. It reads, "Can't fight fate." Nick remembers that this was a phrase Darby used to say. It seems someone is sending them a clear message, pointing the finger directly at Darby. Nick quickly teams up with Detective Dunnigan from the FBI, and they put together a raid on Darby's place. Darby is in his messy living room with a woman asleep on the couch. He is watching the news report about Ames's horrific execution on TV. Suddenly, his phone rings. It's an unknown number, and a disguised voice on the other end warns him that the police are on their way to arrest him right now. Darby looks out his window and sees the police cars pulling up. The voice on the phone gives him step-by-step instructions to escape. Darby runs up to the roof, pulling out a gun, and starts shooting as the first police cars arrive. The mysterious caller guides him to throw away the gun, jump across to another roof, drop down into an alley, and then slip into an empty police cruiser. Inside the car, he will find a police officer who has been knocked out by a taser. Darby follows every single instruction because he has no other choice. He gets into the police car and immediately grabs a gun he finds there. He then wakes up the officer, holds the gun to him, and forces him to drive far out of the city to a lonely, empty area on the outskirts. Once they stop, Darby points the gun at the officer and orders him out of the car, ready to kill him. At that moment, his phone rings one more time. The man on the phone and the police officer both turn out to be the same person, Clyde Shelton. Shelton reveals himself to Darby. In a panic, Darby instinctively pulls the trigger, but the gun is loaded with blanks. Instead of a bullet, when he pulls the trigger, tiny needles shoot out from the handle and inject a powerful poison called tetrodotoxin into his bloodstream. Darby can still see everything, he can still think clearly, and he can still feel everything, but his body is completely frozen and he cannot move a single muscle. Shelton drags Darby's paralyzed body into a nearby warehouse. Inside, the place has been set up like a medical operating room. It is covered in plastic sheeting, filled with restraints, and has video recording equipment. Shelton straps Darby down to a special bed and calmly explains exactly what is going to happen to him. He makes sure Darby understands that he will not lose consciousness, that the poison will keep him fully awake to feel every moment. He quotes Darby's own words back to him one last time. "You can't fight fate."
You can't fight fate. Right, Darby?
Shelton then adjusts a mirror above Darby so that he could see everything by himself. Then, in a cold and methodical way, Shelton begins to cut apart the man who destroyed his family, recording the entire thing. When he is finished, Shelton drives back to the city. He stops and releases the blindfolded police officer he had left tied up in the trunk of the police car, tossing him the keys before driving away in his own vehicle. The next morning, Nick is going through all of Darby's files with Sarah. He tells her about a feeling he has. He does not believe Darby was behind the messed-up execution that killed Ames. His reason is simple. Darby is a violent guy, but he is not smart. What happened to Ames was the work of a very intelligent person. Later that morning, detectives find the warehouse and discover Darby's horrifying remains inside. Detective Dunnigan calls Nick to confirm that his gut feeling was right. As they rush to the crime scene, Sarah starts searching through the district attorney's old files for anything on Clyde Shelton that could explain this level of planning and skill. She finds out he had a good amount of money from his many patented inventions. He used all of that money to buy various properties, clearly for some unknown purpose. At a small house he owns on the outskirts of the city, Shelton hears police sirens getting closer. He knows the moment has arrived. He calmly takes off his clothes, puts down his tools, and simply waits for the police to come through his door. He gives himself up without any fight. But as the officers are leading him away to the police car, he stares directly at Nick with a very intense and piercing look. Inside the house, Dunnigan is confused. He wonders why an engineer like Shelton would own so many books about the law. Nick and Sarah find an old newspaper clipping pinned up. It shows a picture of Nick and Darby shaking hands in front of the courthouse from 10 years ago. In the interrogation room, Shelton sits quietly and does not seem worried at all. Nick comes in. He turns off the room's audio recorder for a moment and quietly tells Shelton, just between them, that he is glad someone got rid of a scumbag like Darby. Then, he switches the audio back on, puts on his official face, and tries to get a confession. Shelton seems willing to talk and gives him a confession, but it is purposely vague and unclear, mirroring exactly the kind of weak evidence that was used against Darby all those years ago. Nick thinks the job is done and starts to leave, but Shelton stops him. He then explains how he carefully chose his words and that nothing he has said so far can be used as a real, solid confession. Nick is shocked and angry. Shelton then makes him an offer. He says he will give a proper, court-ready confession, but only if Nick makes a deal with him first. He wants a better mattress in his cell. He frames it as a lesson, like he is teaching Nick how it feels to be on the other side of one of his deals, to be the person who is truly affected by them. Nick refuses to agree to Shelton's demand for a mattress and walks out of the room. Shelton just smiles. Outside, Jonas tells Nick he should just accept the deal. Without a solid confession, they have no real proof that Shelton is the killer, and they won't be able to convict him in court. But Nick still says no. At the exact same time, back at Nick's house, his daughter Denise receives a package in the mail. Inside is a DVD. Denise asks her mother, Kelly, if they can watch it together, but Kelly is busy cooking in the kitchen. She tells Denise it is probably just some kids' show and lets her watch it alone. But when Denise puts the DVD into the player, she lets out a scream of pure horror. The DVD contains the recorded video of Darby's dismemberment, which Shelton had deliberately sent to Nick's home. Kelly rushes in and immediately calls Nick, telling him their daughter is traumatized after seeing it. Nick finally understands that Shelton is far more intelligent and dangerous than he ever imagined. He immediately agrees to Shelton's demand for a mattress. Shelton gets his mattress. The next day, a preliminary hearing is held in front of Judge Laura Birch. Shelton decides to represent himself in court, and he turns the whole proceeding into a kind of lecture hall. He calmly tells the court that he is simply a law-abiding citizen and reminds them there is no solid proof linking him to any murders. He brings up past legal cases and echoes old court rulings to make his point. His arguments are so persuasive that the judge seems deeply moved and starts to consider letting him go on bail right away. But as soon as Shelton sees this, he immediately turns on her. He calls out the hypocrisy of the system, pointing out that a confessed murderer could be set free just because his argument sounded good enough. The judge feels stung by his words and completely changes her mind. She orders him to be locked up with no chance of bail. Nick can only watch, completely stunned by Shelton's strange and bold behavior. Back inside the prison, Shelton finally confesses to killing both Ames and Darby. Nick breathes a sigh of relief, thinking the case is finally closed. But Shelton is not done yet. He tells Nick that Bill Reynolds, the lawyer who represented Darby 10 years ago, has been missing for 3 days and is in grave danger. He says that if Nick wants to find that man alive, he needs to deliver a steak lunch from a specific restaurant, Del Frisco, along with Shelton's own iPod, by exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The prison warden is insulted by the idea of giving in to a killer's demands. Despite Nick's desperate insistence that the exact time matters, the warden decides to delay the delivery by a few minutes just to prove who is really in charge. The food finally arrives 8 minutes late. As Shelton slowly tastes his meal, Nick watches him impatiently. Shelton seems to enjoy seeing Nick so frustrated, but he still gives up the coordinates of Bill's location. Nick and his team quickly jump into a helicopter and fly to the spot. When they get there, they find a coffin buried underground. Inside is Bill Reynolds, along with a tank of air that would have lasted just long enough for him to survive if the lunch had arrived on time. It is another brutal lesson from Shelton, showing that small acts of authority and the slow pace of the system can sometimes cost a person their life. Back in prison, Shelton offers his threatening cellmate his leftover lunch and then murders him in cold blood using the sharp bone from the steak. This violent act gets him moved into a special isolation cell. Meanwhile, Sarah's research uncovers something new. She finds out that Shelton once had a contract history working with the Department of Defense. Jonas arranges a quiet meeting with a CIA liaison who used to work with Shelton on secret projects. What the liaison tells them is truly terrifying. Shelton was never the person who pulled the trigger on missions. He was the mind behind them. He designed entire operations, figuring out how to kill people who seemed impossible to kill, how to break into places that seemed unbreakable, and how to make terrible events look like simple bad luck. The operative warns them that if you're dealing with Shelton, you have to assume that any plan you think you have stopped was exactly the plan he wanted you to find. If Shelton has decided you're going to die, the only question left is when.
We kill people. He figured out how to do it without ever being in the same room, and he was the best.
Shaken by this new information, Nick and Jonas go to Judge Laura Birch and push her to approve an extension of Shelton's time in solitary confinement, much longer than the usual rules allow. The judge agrees to their request and signs the order. At that very moment, her office phone rings. As she picks it up and answers, the phone explodes in her hand, killing her instantly. Nick and Jonas are left completely shell-shocked and stumble backward in horror. They still have no idea how anyone could have planted a bomb inside her phone without leaving a single trace. Nick drags himself into the prison and goes face-to-face with Shelton. He angrily accuses him of carrying out a personal revenge mission. Shelton calmly replies that revenge is too small a word for what he is doing. He explains that he is teaching a lesson. He wants to show how a justice system that rewards plea deals over the real truth invites terrible things to happen and then calls it efficiency. He then gives Nick a final deadline. He tells him to drop all the charges and release him by 6 o'clock in the morning, or everyone connected to his case will die. Nick reacts by moving the entire district attorney's staff to work inside the prison, hoping the building will keep them safe. He and Sarah sit together in a small, cramped room, trying to figure out who could be helping Shelton carry out his plans from inside a cell, but they come up with nothing. They eventually start arguing about ethics and the results of their work, wondering how to live with the decisions they make in court and within the justice system. The clock finally hits 6 in the morning. Nothing happens. Everyone in the building breathes a huge sigh of relief. Nick tells everyone they can finally go home and get some much-needed rest. He and Jonas then walk out to the parking lot to talk and share a tired, relieved laugh, thinking they might finally be getting past the worst of it. Suddenly, car alarms start going off everywhere. One after another, every staff member's car, including Sarah's, explodes into flames from bombs that were planted inside. The blasts roll through the lot like loud thunder. The air fills with flying glass, intense heat, and screaming people. In the burned aftermath, Nick sits on the curb with his head in his hands. Now he is absolutely certain that Shelton does not need to be on the streets to reach anyone. The mayor has completely run out of patience. She calls Nick and Jonas in and lays the full weight of the city's problems on them. She tells them to fix this fast, or they will lose their jobs, their reputations, and maybe even more. Nick and Jonas promise the mayor that no more killings will happen. Nick sends his own family away to safety, evacuating them from the city, before he goes to meet Shelton outside the prison again. Shelton tells him he should have taken the deal when he had the chance. Nick responds by punching him. Shelton just smiles back at him. He then tells Nick that he is not done yet. Detective Dunnigan wants to shoot Shelton dead right there on the spot, but Nick stops him. At Sarah's funeral, Jonas wonders out loud if all the innocent people who have died are their fault because of how they handled the case 10 years ago. Nick says he believes it is specifically his own fault, but Jonas tries to comfort him. The two men leave the cemetery in a line of black cars. Not far away from them, someone powers up a compact, military-grade machine gun that is mounted on a small platform. The first attack comes as a hail of bullets, followed immediately by a second attack from a missile. The cemetery is thrown into complete chaos. Jonas, who is riding in the first vehicle, is killed instantly. Nick tries to run to him, but his security team stops him and pulls him away. The mayor is now beyond furious. She tells Nick that he has lost too many men in this fight. Nick tells the mayor that he is resigning from his position, but the mayor is not convinced that is the right move. Instead, she appoints Nick as the new head district attorney. Nick starts going through all the research that Sarah had gathered on Shelton, and a clear pattern begins to stand out. Over the last 10 years, Shelton quietly bought a small number of old industrial properties. Nick sends the list to Dunnigan so he can check it against city utility maps and transit lines. The pieces finally fit together when they realize that one of these properties is an old, forgotten garage located right next to the prison. This discovery hits Nick hard. He and Dunnigan go to the place and sneak inside. At first, it looks like an empty garage bay, but behind a false wall, they find the opening of a tunnel. This tunnel connects to an old, unused railroad service line, and from there, a hidden path leads directly underneath the solitary confinement wing. Inside this secret hideaway, they find all the tools used for every crime they could not figure out, including many different disguises Shelton wore to sneak into places. Dunnigan follows the tunnel all the way to a hatch that opens up right below Shelton's cell. He slowly lifts it open, but the bed above is empty. Shelton has slipped out of his cell, likely to commit another one of his crimes. Looking at the evidence left on a workbench, Nick realizes that City Hall is holding a big leadership meeting that very night, and Shelton plans to turn the whole place into a graveyard. The team hurries downtown as fast as they can. Meanwhile, Shelton is already inside the City Hall building. He is disguised as a janitor, moving around normally among the staff and other workers. He wheels his cleaning cart right past security and disappears into the service hallways. Hidden inside his mop bucket is a bomb, packed inside a plain suitcase, which can be set off by a phone call. He plants this bomb in a small crawl space directly under the room where the mayor and all her top officials will be meeting. He then tidies up the area as if nothing ever happened and walks back out the same way he came in, calmly waiting for the moment it will explode. Nick, Dunnigan, and another detective sweep through the building, and thankfully, they manage to find the bomb. The third detective kneels down to examine it and says it is a very complex device, the kind that is hard to disarm and can be triggered remotely by a simple phone call. Dunnigan tells Nick they need to warn the mayor, but Nick quickly disagrees. He now understands that Shelton will be watching City Hall closely. If they try to evacuate the building, Shelton will see it and blow up the bomb immediately. They decide not to alarm the mayor with a panicked evacuation. Nick's guess is correct. Shelton is watching everything through one of the many tiny cameras he has hidden all around the building, and he will set off the bomb the second he thinks they have found it. While all this is happening, Shelton slips back through his secret tunnel and returns to solitary confinement, expecting to find his cell exactly the way he left it. Instead, he finds Nick waiting for him in the darkness, holding a gun. The two men talk quietly in the space beneath the prison. Nick repeats something Jonas once said to him about having to live with the choices you make. Shelton just smiles at the irony of the moment and accepts that his time has come.
You played us, Clyde. You played us real good.
Thank you.
He asks Nick for one last deal. This time, Nick says no. He tells Shelton that the lesson has finally sunk in. Cutting corners just to guarantee a win is still a cut, and someone always ends up bleeding because of it. For just a moment, Shelton's expression softens. He is honestly glad that Nick has finally learned something from all of this. He admits that now he has nothing left to live for. He reaches for the phone that will set off the bomb at City Hall and end everything on his own terms. Nick stops him and says that the choice he makes right now will define him forever. He tells Shelton that even when your life has been emptied by pain and loss, the next decision you make is still yours to carry. The two men look at each other and exchange apologies. They are both truly sorry for the things they have done. And then, Shelton presses the button on the phone. Nick turns and walks out of the cell, not impressed by the choice Shelton just made. The signal to detonate is sent, but no explosion happens at City Hall. While Shelton was out of his cell, Nick's team moved the bomb. The phone-triggered suitcase is now sitting right underneath Shelton's own bed. Shelton realizes what has happened and tries to hide inside his secret tunnel, but Dunnigan seals the door shut from the other side, trapping him inside. As the two men walk away from the area, Shelton seems to finally accept what is coming. The room lights up in a bright white flash, and the explosion completely destroys the whole solitary block. Peace finally returns to the city, and most of all, to Nick's life. In the very last scene, we see Denise playing her cello at her recital. Nick and Kelly watch her from the audience, their faces filled with pride and joy. And that is the end of the story. If you like this video, please press the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. See you in the next video.